Welcome everybody to the flood risk and climate resilience webinar. I'm Graham Duffield. I head up the transactions team here at Delta Simons. We provide advice to clients in the UK and in across Europe. And Alex Perriman in our flood team is going to be delivering the webinar. Just in terms of kicking off, just a bit of housekeeping. Everybody will be on mute, as is the norm for these sort of webinars. We will be recording the session and the slides will be available. So I think we'll be automatically emailing those through to anybody that wants them. If there are any questions that arise throughout the webinar, if you want to put them in the chat function and we can address them, either if it's anything immediate, Alex can address those immediately, or we can pick up at the end of the session. Other thing to flag, we are speaking to a lot of clients at the minute about transactional ESG. So following this webinar, we will be doing another one in this series, either later in December or probably more likely in early January. So we're just in the process of finalising a date for that, and we'll get that clarified as soon as we can. So I will now shut up and hand over to Alex. Over to you, Alex.
Thanks, Graham. For those of you that don't know me, my name's Alex Perryman. I co-lead the water services team at Delta Simons, and I have over 20 years experience in the water industry. My roles largely focus on the transactional side of flood risk, working regularly with Graham, researching into ESG, flood risk and climate change, and to help develop products to help inform our clients. So first off, thanks for joining the CPD event on flood risk and climate resilience. This presentation will last about 20 minutes, and as per the agenda, focuses on what you as our investor clients are asking in the marketplace with regards to flood risk from a climate change perspective. Our objective is to answer the following frequently asked questions. Why is flood risk and climate change important in real estate investment? What are the main drivers? What are the potential flood risk impacts? What are the main data gaps and challenges? And finally, how we at Delta Simons can support you in making your current and potential future assets flood and climate resilient in order to help with your decision making. So the first question, at Delta Simons, we get asked daily by our investor clients why. Why is flood risk and climate change important in real estate investment? Well, in short, the purpose is that you as investors want to safeguard your assets from future risks, such as increasing flood risk caused by climate change. By safeguarding your assets, this will lessen the risk of your assets devaluing over time or the inability to sell an asset as a result of climate change. There may also be capex implications to provide flood and climate resilient measures or increasing challenges in the ability to obtain insurance at commercially acceptable rates. That's especially if it cannot be demonstrated that your assets are safe, flood or climate resilient. So I will cover the approach Delta Simons has taken to help address the above challenges later in this presentation. And in light of the above, we therefore need to understand what are the main drivers in order to understand what is required to safeguard your assets. So what are the main drivers? The main driver is the TCFD, or Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures. The TCFD is the main framework and has been formed by the Financial Stability Board to help identify the information needed by investors, lenders and insurance underwriters to appropriately assess, price and disclose climate-related risks and opportunities over the short, medium and long term. Now, there are other frameworks such as the SFDR, which has a heavier weighting on sustainability, but for us, the TCFD is the go-to ESG reporting framework, especially from a climate change perspective, to ultimately help companies develop an overarching ESG strategy. It is currently voluntary, but it is due to become a mandatory requirement next year in 2023. The exact date is to be confirmed, which is why our investor clients are asking the questions of climate change and flood risk now, for you to get a better understanding of what is required and what steps need to be taken now in advance of 2023, which is now just around the corner. Regarding EU taxonomy, this is complex. Under EU taxonomy, contributions towards the climate change adaptation objective require some companies to make an assessment of physical climate risks which have the potential to impact the company and its facilities. Our Delta Simon's reports can be used by our clients to inform EU taxonomy alignment as well as TCFD disclosures as part of a joined up approach to help our clients out as much as possible in this fast paced arena. It's not mandatory for all, but some companies are seeking to align to EU taxonomy as part of best practice. So the TCFD breaks down risks into physical and transitional climate risks, in which flood risk clearly falls into the physical risk category. Now, other physical risks can include acute event driven risks such as drought, floods, wildfires, extreme precipitation, etc., or chronic long term climate risks such as rising temperature and sea level. At Delta Simons, we can actually also assess these wider risks, physical risks for you, but I will come back to that later in this presentation. And transitional risks, if interested, arise from changes in policy and new technologies such as the growth of renewable energy. Delta Simons again can provide additional support in this ESG arena if required. Another key driver is the value at risk or VAR measure of an asset or portfolio of assets. With an increase in flood risk as a result of climate change, and without flood and climate resilient measures implemented over time, there is a real risk of devaluation of an asset or portfolio of assets. Furthermore, there could be operational disruption or additional saleability and insurance challenges. So, to reduce the potential financial risks, solutions are a series of potential measures to reduce that risk, including installation or retrofitting of flood and climate resistant and resilient measures. Such measures include floodproof doors, window shutters, raising, relocating sensitive equipment, use of waterproof materials, etc. Now, these kind of resilience measures can work up to about zero point 0.6 meters in depth, which could provide some comfort when risk is present. However, anything greater, you have to let the water in and try and be resilient, which is called a water entry strategy, but that's usually secondary and as a last resort. In addition, there are softer but equally important measures, such as ongoing and regular maintenance of any drainage, suds, or site defences, especially after heavy rainfall. If your site is considered to be at risk, then sign up to the Flood Warning Service and produce a flood response plan to ensure business continuity, safe emergency and evacuation, and a clearly defined set of approach and set of responsibilities. Clearly, there will be a cost to install these measures. Therefore, there are potential capex implications to ensure there is a return on investment for any upgrades or improvements to your physical assets. Capex can also be undertaken on any new opportunities to ensure the risks are appropriately assessed and that mitigation is accounted for, which ultimately helps your decision making in terms of whether to keep, buy, or sell an asset. Delta Simons can certainly help you on all of these components. So, what are the potential flood risk impacts? Why is flood risk high on the agenda in terms of physical risks, and why should they be looked at? Well, to put simply, there are potential significant impacts that could arise if flood risk is not considered early on in the decision making process. So, taking one of these as an example, sea level rise, an increase in the severity of extreme weather events may financially impact operations. For example, increased temperatures result in melting ice, seawater expansion leads to global sea level rise. Rising sea levels can result in increased tidal flooding, operational disruption, and economic damage to assets that are in these coastal locations. However, all of these impacts have the ability to derail or change an investment decision. However, for me, the first four generally hold more weight, especially tidal. As I said, these sources have the ability to cause the highest damages, operational and social disruption, and the need to invest in these measures. Ultimately, you as investors want to know what the risks are as a result of climate change, how to adhere to the mandatory TCFD reporting requirements, and ensure your assets are flood and climate resilience. And climate change is only going to increase the potential risks. So sites now, like for example in flood zone 1, could be at risk in the future, which will increase the need for those flood and climate resilience measures. Now, I'll only provide a brief overview of the approach or process. So if you require a more detailed breakdown, please let me know. So the ESG physical risks are largely measured through representative concentration pathways, or RCPs. They've been adopted by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC. The RCPs relate to greenhouse gas emissions and trajectories. So by assessing temperature changes, we can assess those physical risks to an asset. The main RCPs are the RCP 2.6, 4.5, 6.0, and 8.5. I'd say think of it as a grading from best case to the worst case, a little like flood zones 1, 2, and 3. And then that global IPCC data I referred to actually gets then condensed forward into the UK climate projections or local UK CP18 data, and that's what we use to assess UK assets. Now, in red at the bottom, it's a key takeaway point is that investors are required to assess two RCP scenarios, one of which has to be the RCP 2.6, and the other is depending on your requirements. Now, Delta Simons can help you with this stage. So I tend to look at the RCP 8.5 worst case and the 2100 extreme timeframe. Because if your assets are not at risk in this scenario, your assets are considered protected from climate change. And then if there is a level of risk, we can then conduct a deeper dive into those other RCP scenarios. So data gaps and challenges. Our products use all available and relevant flood risk and climate information. However, as expected, there are limitations, assumptions, gaps and challenges between the datasets and portals that we use. This is not an exhaustive list, but it does cover the main points. So first of all, the time frame. It takes a statutory 20 working days for the EA to provide the data. And we recommend the EA product data is obtained as it includes the flood depth and climate change data, which can be compared with the UK local UK CP18 data to work out what is most representative. And without that data, there's no direct or easy comparison with the UK CP18 data. The EA does not assess all RCPs and time periods, but we know that the flood zones closest correlate with the RCP 8.5 2100 scenario. EA models vary in coverage, quality, and accuracy, and do not always clearly separate fluvial and tidal interactions. They can, but they don't always. There is a disconnect in terminology. So the EA works around return periods, the 1 in a 100-year flood event, whilst climate data evolves around RCPs. So for me, the EA is simply playing catch up in order to better align and provide more transparency on their internal mechanisms and allow better comparison with this UK CP18 data. Regarding Europe, readily available flood and climate data does vary widely. For example, Delta Simons can produce flood risk appraisals in Germany, Netherlands, Croatia, and most of Scandinavia. Moving away from EA to climate data, the UK CP18 data is available for sea level rise, which is the dominant flood risk source, and as mentioned, creates the greatest damages. Sites at tidal risk therefore tend to be higher up on the priority list or RAG ratings than the other sources of flooding. We can provide high-level surface water climate change commentary using climate change precipitation data from a portal split by RCPs. However, there's another challenge for sites at fluvial risk because we really only have EA climate change data. However, Delta Simons has recently found a climate change fluvial portal which provides an initial level of risk. However, the data or fluvial data is for the UK as a whole rather than site specific. Amongst these challenges, there are positives. The EA data allows us to correlate the worst case RCP 8.5 scenario, and the analysis can be visualized graphically. And following on, what are the implications of those data gaps and challenges? While the online EA maps are often unrepresentative, we cannot solely rely on them. For example, the maps tend to not accurately take into account climate change, which is why we recommend that EA data. It does require require the flood depth and climate change data within that EAPD data. The implication is that we cannot easily complete all our reporting in standard due diligence timeframes. So please get us involved as early as possible to lessen that risk. There are also reporting implications for a multitude of reasons. Firstly, the disconnect in terminology, which makes it difficult to directly compare EA data with UK CP18 data and then report on it. Secondly, there are reporting implications due to the disconnect in flood and climate data. For instance, we know the EA data largely correlates with the 8.5 scenario, but the internal mechanisms are not known, which restricts direct comparison with the UK 18 data. Furthermore, the EA data varies in terms of coverage and quality, and therefore climate change data is not always included or up to date, and therefore we cannot confidently compare sometimes with RCP 8.5. And lastly, the EA data does not model smaller watercourses, which means assets could be at increased risk as a result of climate change, all of which provides reporting challenges due to that disconnect. Now, in terms of reporting, tidal risk can be reported on in detail given the wealth and compatibility of data. So that's for tidal. Fluvial and surface water climate data can only be assessed at a high level, but gives a good indication of the initial level of risk and can be compared with EA data. Now, this is expected to be preferred to hydraulic modelling, which would otherwise be potentially time and cost prohibitive. In Europe, it's a similar story. There's a disconnect in flood and climate terminology between countries. Furthermore, whilst flood risk can be assessed in these countries, climate change is largely not accurately aligned with RCPs, creating both data and reporting challenges. The positive is that the implications or disconnects have allowed Delta Simons to offer various service offerings in the UK and across Europe, depending on the time frame, the level of detail, and available data. So that leads neatly on to how we can support you. So we can offer a staged approach where we initially complete a flood and climate risk review, where we rag a portfolio of sites, which is point one. And then stage two would be either a flood risk appraisal or a flood risk and climate resilience report, which are points two and three. Now, our standard flood risk appraisals, these reports now as default will have a climate change commentary from an ESG and TCFD perspective, unless you tell us otherwise. If forward funding is being considered, we can also look at future planning or redevelopment implications. If the site is at tidal risk, we can alternatively complete a bespoke flood risk and climate resilience ESG assessment, which is the point three, as we have the level of detail to complete a standalone report in line with those regulatory reporting requirements. And if our clients are looking for a physical risk climate assessment, which is the final point, to assess those wider climate risks, we can provide an initial steer for you on your existing portfolios to see whether further work is required in terms of mitigation and climate resilience measures. We will probably cover off the wider physical risks and, as Graham mentioned earlier, the transactional ESG reporting as follow-up CPD presentations if interested. Now, lastly, and not on the list, as it's more of an advisory service, we can discuss matters such as ESG, EU taxonomy, TCFD, physical risks, future planning, etc., to help guide you through that ESG labyrinth. So please just ask. As a heads up, at project inception, we tend to ask the client four main questions. What do you need to be complying with? What time periods are you working towards? What are your reporting requirements? And do you have a set VAR formula? That way we can help determine what level of service to offer. And if unsure, we can recommend an initial meeting with ourselves and yourselves to discuss your requirements and help direct you to the best course of action. The last point I want to reiterate is the goalposts are continually moving as guidance and frameworks are evolving. Therefore, we and our services are continually adapting as we keep pace with ESG. So in summary, we set out four key questions in which this presentation focused on. Firstly, why is flood risk and climate change important? Well, to safeguard your assets and to reduce the risk of devaluation, the inability to sell an asset, or the potential capex implications to make an asset flood and climate resilient. Why? What's the main drivers? The TCFD is the main driver, in which it will become a mandatory requirement in 2023, in which the RCP 2.6 has to be assessed along with one other RCP scenario of your choosing. Other drivers include the VAR and CapEx implications to provide appropriate flood mitigation and climate resilient measures. Thirdly, what are your data gaps and challenges? Well, to sum up, the climate data differs widely in terms of coverage, quality, accuracy, and compatibility across the UK and Europe, which determines the services we can offer. And how can we support you? Delta Simons has undertaken a wealth of research and development to get us where we are today, understanding the challenges to allow us to offer a suite of services to help you assess your assets and determine what measures are required to help you work towards achieving TCFD compliance and EU taxonomy alignment. And as always, if you're unsure, please give myself or Graham a call. Thank you for listening. And are there any questions?
Thanks, Alex. That was really useful. I'm sure everybody else found that really useful as well. Makes my job a little bit easier. There's no immediate questions in the chat at the minute, which is fine. As I said at the start, I think we will be emailing out the actual transcript in terms of the recording of this presentation, also the slides. I know a couple of clients emailed through earlier just to ask whether they could have those, so that won't be a problem. We'll get those across to everybody. And if there's any follow-up questions, both mine and Alex's details will be on the bottom of those documents. I think just while Alex was talking, we did finalise the date for the transactional ESG webinar, which will be probably, let me just check. I think that is going to be Wednesday, the 18th of January. So we'll provide some more information nearer the time. But yeah, very much appreciate everybody joining, and I hope you all found that really useful. So thank you.